the NBA just had its biggest reset ever. For the first time in 10 years, the most private superstar in basketball history finally broke his silence. And he did it to name a new king.
Tim Duncan just came out on record.
Everyone has an opinion on Wemby, but almost nobody knows.
He basically called Wemby his favorite player in the league right now. He talked about how special the kid is, but it didn't even stop there. If you think Duncan was just watching from the sidelines, you are completely missing the biggest takeover in sports right now. Rumors are leaking straight from the Spurs facility. Tim Duncan just ended his retirement from the spotlight. Why? 'Cause he wants to personally coach Wemby for the finals. Trust me, the NBA has never seen anything like this. Everyone knows Duncan spent the last 10 years completely ignoring the NBA, acting like it didn't even exist. But then, he suddenly showed up front row at the Frost Bank Center in the spring of 2026. He was there just to watch a 22-year-old French kid break his franchise records, and he had a massive smile on his face. This is a guy who hates attention so much that he didn't even give a real retirement speech back in 2016. He just walked out the back door, went off the grid, and started customizing cars and playing paintball. He ignored everyone. In fact, Greg Popovich literally told reporters in 2022 that Duncan was done with basketball forever. He said Duncan would probably never attend another game because he had zero interest in coaching or being a public figure. Pop basically gave up trying to get him to practices because Duncan just wanted peace and quiet. But then, Victor Wembanyama starts casually passing Duncan's rookie and playoff records. Suddenly, the man who swore off the sport is sitting courtside, looking like a proud older brother. Legendary NBA insider Mark Stein dropped a massive report. He revealed that Duncan quietly agreed to start showing up at the Spurs practice facility regularly. His goal? To play one-on-one against Wemby, pass down his knowledge, and help train him for the finals. Think about how crazy that is compared to any other superstar in history. Nobody came out of retirement like this for LeBron. Yet, the most disciplined, low-key champion ever completely changed his entire retirement lifestyle just to be around Wemby. But here is where it gets really wild. You won't believe how early this passing of the torch actually started behind the scenes. On the very second night after the 2023 draft, Wemby was already at a restaurant, having a private dinner with the Spurs' Mount Rushmore, Duncan, David Robinson, and Manu Ginobili. After that dinner, Wemby told the media that he learned more about the reality of the NBA in those few hours than he had in his entire life.
Probably one of the best, in probably a couple hours, I learned more about the NBA than in my whole life before,
Even Manu Ginobili went on the record right after that to back Wemby up. He said the kid already has the whole package and doesn't even need much help. He couldn't believe how mature Wemby is for a 22-year-old.
That young man doesn't need much. He has the whole package. He's incredible, and he's so mature for being 22.
It really makes you stop and think. What does a guy like Tim Duncan, who completely walked away from the sport, know about this kid that the rest of the world is only now starting to figure out? Duncan doesn't do publicity stunts for brands. He doesn't care about social media views. And he definitely doesn't need any extra money or fame from the Spurs. So, if he is willingly waking up early to sweat in a practice gym against a sophomore, it means the talent is the real deal. Duncan sees that the future of the franchise is in safe hands. But here is the most shocking part. Duncan coming back to the facility sent a massive signal to every other old-school legend. Proved that Wembanyama is the truth, and it completely changed how the entire basketball world treats him. Having the greatest power forward of all time in your corner is already a massive cheat code. But Duncan was just the first one to step up.
Every single NBA fan assumed Chris Paul was just a temporary Band-Aid when he signed that one-year contract back in 2024. The entire media narrative was that he just wanted to collect a healthy paycheck and throw a few high-percentage lob passes before riding off into the sunset. But that version of the story completely falls apart when you look at the news leaking directly from the Spurs right now. According to Spurs insiders, Chris Paul is not even under contract anymore. Yet he recently randomly crashed their training for the sole purpose of personally helping Victor Wembanyama through the current finals. On June 2nd of this year, Chris Paul went on a major interview and casually talked about how effortless it is to help and train this kid because his brain already has the processing speed of a supercomputer.
Just his mentality, right? I think that's why everyone appreciates him. He doesn't say what everybody thinks he's supposed to say. He says his real feelings, his real emotions, and he can do that because he done invested the work.
I'm not sure you understand the magnitude of this because while practically every other veteran in the NBA is currently sitting on a beach in Cabo drinking cocktails, a guy with zero financial or contractual ties to San Antonio is actively pulling up for training just for Wemby. But that craziness only starts to make sense when you realize exactly what all these old-school Hall of Famers discovered about Wemby's true passion for the game. Most people believe a 22-year-old kid in his first real playoff run spends his summer playing video games or traveling on luxury yachts with friends. But Wembanyama took that expectation and completely shattered it by flying to China for 2 straight weeks to isolate himself inside the actual Shaolin Temple. He spent 14 days training alongside monks to weaponize his physical balance and mental discipline. However, the real mystery started the exact second his plane touched down back in America. He did not even bother to go home to unpack his bags before he booked a series of private, unlisted gym sessions with Kevin Garnett and Hakeem Olajuwon. Just try to process what a kid who hasn't even finished his 3rd year in the league is actively doing behind closed doors. He is systematically gathering the cheat codes from the most ruthless players to ever play the sport. Even the GOAT, Michael Jordan, had to completely rely on whatever staff his front office felt like hiring. But Wembanyama went out and hunted down legendary greatness across 3 separate continents before he was even legally old enough to rent a car. That level of psychotic preparation is precisely why the Wemby has become the player he is. The unbelievable twist in all of this is that this Avengers lineup of legends isn't mentoring him because they want to be nice or because they think he's a fun kid to hang out with. They are doing this because they recognize an unprecedented storm is about to hit the sport, and they want to make sure they are the ones who handed him the keys to the kingdom. Every single era of basketball royalty is breaking league etiquette to hand this kid their secret blueprints. And when you track how this postseason is playing out, you realize this massive mentorship network is colliding with the exact year Tim Duncan won his first ring. And it's not just the ring.
San Antonio Spurs have won their first NBA championship.
When you pull up the actual records of the 1999 NBA Finals and overlay them on top of this 2026 postseason, it honestly feels like the league scriptwriters just copied and pasted Tim Duncan's file. Back in 1999, a 22-year-old Tim Duncan marched into the NBA Finals representing San Antonio to face off against the New York Knicks. And right now, a 22-year-old Victor Wembanyama is standing on that same hardwood, wearing that same franchise jersey, staring down the exact same team from New York. Think about how historically brutal that is for the Knicks fan base, because they literally had to wait nearly 3 decades just to get back to the biggest stage in basketball, only to find another 7-foot beast waiting to ruin their lives at the finish line. But what genuinely makes this weird is that this is not just a weird historical coincidence or some random trivia fact your casual friends talk about on group chats, because the actual individual box scores are where this whole thing goes from a neat storyline to an absolute simulation. During that legendary 1999 championship run, Tim Duncan averaged 23 points, 11 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game while shooting 51% from the field. If you pull up the current 2026 playoff leaderboard right now, Wembanyama is averaging 23.2 points, 10.8 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks while shooting 51% dead on. They are putting up the same stat line across different eras, and the actual teams they had to get through to get here make it even crazier. Both of them had to completely handle a hyper-physical Minnesota front court. Both of them had to push past Portland, and both of them had to systematically destroy their generation's most hyped rival big man. Duncan had to bang bodies with a prime Shaq, and Wemby just spent the Western Conference Finals completely putting Chet Holmgren in a blender. Now you need to hear what Spurs legend Sean Elliott recently said, because his perspective completely flips this whole scenario into a horror movie for the rest of the league. Elliott went on record and openly stated that Wemby is still just getting started and hasn't even begun to reach his true potential, which means he is not not even close to his ultimate form. Let that sink in for a second, because if a kid playing at what looks like 40% of his full capacity is already matching a prime Hall of Famer stat for stat on a championship run, the rest of the NBA is in a whole lot of trouble. That exact realization is the terrifying thought Tim Duncan is sitting with every single time he watches from his front row seat. He is not just looking at a great sophomore, he is watching a player who might render the entire history of basketball completely obsolete before he even turns 25. That terrifying ceiling is exactly why the mentorship behind the scenes has suddenly shifted from basic court positioning to a deeply emotional operation. While Duncan is handling the physical blueprint in the gym, the most crucial voice in this entire journey is actually speaking to him from the absolute shadows. Everyone thinks Greg Popovich is completely removed from the daily stress of this intense playoff run, but nothing could be more wrong. What a lot of fans don't know is that Greg Popovich is literally running a full-scale NBA Finals masterclass through standard text messages while recovering from a serious medical emergency away from the team. Everyone in the media assumed the Spurs would completely fall apart the second Pop had to step back from the sidelines, but the exact opposite happened because his connection with Victor Wembanyama has turned into the most emotional coaching dynamic we have ever seen in modern sports. Wemby casually dropped a massive detail during a recent post-game press conference, revealing that he speaks to Pop every single day, before and after games. Whether it is a quick text message or a middle-of-the-night phone call, Popovich is actively watching every single micro movement from his couch, constantly texting Wemby to take his time, play off 2 feet, and stop rushing his reads against the New York defense. It is completely insane to think about because Pop coached Tim Duncan to 5 separate championships over 2 decades, and now he is orchestrating a brand new dynasty through a smartphone screen. But you won't believe the actual message that popped up on Wembanyama's phone immediately after they wrapped up Game 1 of these finals. Most coaches would try to protect a 22-year-old kid's confidence on the biggest stage of his life, but Popovich completely skipped the coddling. Wemby openly told reporters that Pop texted him a brutal reality check, explicitly telling him that in the big lines he played like absolute garbage, and that he is way better than what he put on film. That is classic old-school tough love that you simply do not see in today's soft NBA, and it directly explains why this kid treats Popovich like a legendary figure rather than just a team coach. Right after the Spurs clinched the Western Conference Finals, Wemby could barely even get his words out at the podium because he was so visibly choked up. He told the entire room of reporters that Pop has more basketball experience than almost anyone alive, that he is going through real-life struggles behind the scenes that normal people cannot even comprehend, and that the very first thing he needed to do before celebrating was call him. This whole situation draws a wild parallel to how Phil Jackson used to work with Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. But this version feels infinitely heavier because of the high stakes involved. And that brings us to the question, how is he handling this much pressure? Well, a reporter directly asked Wembanyama what it feels like to carry the expectations of a 5-time champion like Tim Duncan while trying to win a ring at 22 years old.